What if the part of you that looks strong is actually the most broken? Nietzsche didn't just talk about suffering. He revealed the quiet tricks we use to hide from ourselves. And the first one is acting okay. You act okay, not because you are, but because no one would know what to do if you weren't. You say, "I'm fine," so quickly, it doesn't even feel like a lie anymore. You show up, get things done, smile when expected, and never let the exhaustion show in your voice. And somehow, that became your identity. The one who holds it all together. The one who never needs help. The one who keeps smiling, even when there's a storm inside. But Nietzsche would say that's exactly the problem. Because a person who forgets how to fall apart also forgets how to truly feel alive. Here's the truth most people never say out loud. Pretending is easier than explaining. It takes less energy to say, "I'm okay," than to try and describe what's really happening inside you. It's less painful to fake a laugh than to admit you feel disconnected from everything. And it's safer to perform normal than to risk the rejection that often comes with honesty. So you do it, not just with others, but with yourself. And that's what Nietzsche feared. Not pain, but denial. He believed that the more we avoid our truth, the more our truth controls us. And the person who hides their suffering too well eventually becomes a stranger to themselves. It started small. Maybe someone told you to toughen up when you were younger. Maybe crying made people uncomfortable. Maybe asking for help got you labeled dramatic. So you stopped. You coped. You learned to internalize. And now you joke when you feel anxious. You distract yourself when you feel sad. You make sure everyone else is okay, so no one has time to ask how you are. It's not your fault. It's what you had to do to survive. But Nietzsche would say, what helped you survive yesterday might be the same thing keeping you lost today. Because when you carry pain for too long without naming it, it starts naming you. You know what hurts the most? When people praise your strength, but never notice the weight you're under. They say, "You're so resilient. You always figure it out. You're the calm one." But behind that calmness is someone who hasn't cried in weeks, not because you didn't want to, but because you forgot how to. And Nietzsche would call this a spiritual silence, not peace, but numbness. A detachment that looks like maturity on the surface, but underneath is nothing more than quiet suffering. The longer you carry the performance, the more invisible your pain becomes, not just to others, but to you. You stop looking forward to things. You laugh, but it feels distant. You show up, but something in you feels half present, like you're watching your life instead of living it. And when someone asks, "Are you okay?" you answer too fast, too practiced, because deep down, you know if you pause, even for a second, it might all come rushing out. Nietzsche said that those who suffer silently are often the ones who've learned to suffer skillfully. But even skill has its limits. The body keeps the tension. The mind keeps the memory. And the soul? the soul begins to fade into the background, waiting for a moment when it's finally safe to speak again. Here's something terrifying. You can become so good at pretending that even you forget you're pretending. You confuse coping with healing. You confuse busyness with purpose. You confuse being fine with being alive. And Nietzsche would say, that's when the soul begins to decay. Not because you're weak, but because pretending requires you to abandon your most honest self. You become a reflection of other people's needs, a version of yourself that looks successful, useful, likable, but no longer real. And when you lose your realness, you lose your access to meaning. Sometimes it shows up like burnout. Other times, like boredom. Sometimes it feels like, I don't care about anything anymore. But you do care. You've just buried yourself so deep under the mask, you forgot how to come up for air. And this is what Nietzsche meant when he said, man is the cruelest animal. Not to others, but to himself. Because we deny our needs. We suppress our grief. We punish our feelings. And we call it strength. But real strength is feeling what's true. And still showing up. Not hiding it. Not performing through it. But holding it with honesty. You were never meant to carry everything alone. You were never meant to pretend for this long. You were never meant to wear this many layers just to feel accepted. And if there's a quiet voice inside you, the one you keep pushing away, that voice isn't weakness. It's not failure. It's not dramatic. It's yourself asking to come back. Nietzsche believed the greatest form of strength was not endurance, but self-awareness. Because once you see yourself clearly, you can never go back to living blind. But seeing clearly comes with a cost, a choice, a crack in the surface you've worked so hard to keep intact. And once that crack shows, you begin to realize you can't carry this forever. And maybe you were never supposed to. The world thinks you're fine because you trained it to. But Nietzsche believed that when you stay silent too long, the soul starts to rot from the inside. You didn't choose to become the strong one. It happened quietly, in conversations where no one asked how you were, in rooms where you held the tension just to keep others from falling apart, in moments where you put your pain on hold because someone else's pain felt louder. So you taught yourself, don't complain, don't ask, just keep going. And somewhere along the way, strength became your only language. Not joy, not presence, not softness, just survival. But Nietzsche warned, that kind of survival isn't noble. It's dangerous. Because when you hold it all together for too long, you start to believe you're not allowed to fall apart. You've tried to open up before. You dropped little hints. You sent vague messages. You hoped someone would notice when your voice changed or your energy slipped. But most people didn't. They heard your words, but not your meaning. They offered cliches instead of care. They gave advice instead of presence. And so, you stopped trying. Now, you've mastered the quiet withdrawal. You show up, you nod, you engage just enough to avoid suspicion. But you're fading, and no one seems to notice. Nietzsche would call this a social illusion, a world where everyone talks, but no one actually sees. Here's what most people don't understand. The ones who break down easily aren't always the weakest, and the ones who seem fine aren't always okay. Sometimes, the person who seems the most put together is the one who's learned how to bleed without making a sound. You've cared deeply. You've given more than you had. You've held people during their storms, while your own roof was falling in. And now? Now you're tired in a way that rest doesn't fix. It's not sleep you're missing. It's feeling, connection, peace. And Nietzsche would say that the exhaustion you feel isn't from weakness. It's from the emotional theft of being everything for everyone and nothing for yourself. It's not. Sometimes you want to disappear. Not dramatically, not forever. Just enough to reset, to breathe without guilt, to cry without explaining, to be with your thoughts without fixing anyone else's. But then you feel guilty, because the world taught you that your value is in what you give, that rest is laziness, that distance is cold, that saying no means you're failing someone. But Nietzsche believed that withdrawal isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Because when the world drains you, retreating is a form of self-respect. You don't need to justify your stillness. You don't need to apologize for needing space. You're allowed to protect your peace, even if it disappoints people who only loved the version of you that served them. The scary thing about emotional pain is how quiet it becomes. At first, it screams, then it whispers, then it just sits there, a dull, low ache that follows you from room to room. You stop noticing joy. You stop reaching out. You stop hoping that anything's really going to change. But Nietzsche would say, this numbness is not your end. It's your warning. It means something inside you is tired of being ignored. And if you listen, even a little, that numbness becomes a compass. It starts guiding you toward what's real. There's a lie that says, if I were stronger, I wouldn't feel like this. But Nietzsche believed the opposite. He believed that feeling deeply and refusing to lie about it is the bravest thing you can do. You don't need to be unbreakable. You need to be human. You don't need to hide your scars. You need to know they still make you whole. You don't need to wait for someone to save you. You need to start saving the parts of you that stopped believing you were worth saving. You edit your words. You water down your feelings. You say, it's not a big deal, even when it's breaking you. And the more you filter, the more invisible you become, even to yourself. Nietzsche called this self-betrayal, not because you lied to others, but because you abandoned your own inner truth to protect people who wouldn't protect you. Every time you shrink your needs, every time you stay quiet to keep the peace, every time you ignore your own signals just to keep showing up, you lose another layer of who you were meant to be. And the longer you stay like that, the harder it becomes to remember what wholeness even felt like. What if your suffering isn't weakness, but a signal? What if it's your body, your mind, your soul, trying to bring you home? Nietzsche didn't believe life should be easy. He believed it should be honest. He said, pain is the price of self-realization, because only when you stop numbing yourself can you start hearing what the pain is trying to say. That you've outgrown certain roles, that you're done performing, that the life you're carrying doesn't match the one you truly want. And that's not failure, it's freedom. But to reach it, you'll have to do the one thing you've been avoiding. Let go of the performance. And if you're starting to feel that shift inside, that tiny sword that says, I can't keep doing this, then you're already closer than you think. Because what happens after you stop pretending isn't destruction, it's awakening. But awakening doesn't start with clarity. It starts with the collapse. When the pretending ends, something else begins. Not chaos, not weakness, but a kind of clarity that Nietzsche believed only comes through collapse. You've spent years keeping it all together, but holding it all inside doesn't make you stronger. It makes you disappear. And the truth is, your breakdown isn't the enemy. It's the breakthrough trying to get through the noise. Nietzsche believed that the self doesn't emerge through comfort. It emerges through tension, through facing everything you tried to avoid, through sitting in silence long enough to hear the truth underneath the noise. And maybe that's where you are now, on the edge of something real. Most people avoid collapse because they think it means failure. They fear the day they can't keep pretending. They fear the moment they cry and can't stop. They fear waking up and realizing they don't want the life they've built. But Nietzsche didn't fear collapse. He feared comfort without truth. He believed that real transformation starts the moment your false self can't carry the story anymore. Because collapse doesn't destroy you. It strips away everything that isn't truly you. The people who never really saw you. The expectations you could never meet. The pain you kept absorbing just to feel useful. It all falls away. And what's left? Not the perfect version of you, but the honest one. The one who still feels, still hopes, still has something sacred buried underneath all the pretending. There's a difference between holding it together and being held. One is exhausting. The other is healing. But you've lived so long in survival mode that even rest feels suspicious. Stillness feels lazy. Peace feels unfamiliar. Because for so long, your identity was built around endurance. And now, you don't know who you are without the chaos. But Nietzsche believed the return to self isn't loud. It's not a dramatic moment. It's quiet. It happens in those still hours where you sit with your sadness and don't run, where you let go of fixing and just allow things to be broken, where you stop editing yourself just to feel acceptable. And in that space, the real you shows up. Not the version built to impress, the one built to be. Underneath the version of you that's tired is the version that still dreams, the one that wanted more, the one that believed love should feel safe, that friendships should feel mutual, that emotions shouldn't be punished, that life should feel alive. Nietzsche said, "Become who you are." It sounds simple, but it's the hardest thing a person can do, because it means tearing off every layer that was built out of fear. It means disappointing people who only loved the mask. It means grieving the version of you that always said yes, always showed up, always put others first. And it means choosing a new path, one that isn't about survival, but about sovereignty. If you've ever been told that you're too emotional, too intense, too deep, too complicated, that's not a flaw. That's a misalignment. Nietzsche didn't believe we should dull our light to fit the dim rooms we were placed in. He believed that truth, when lived fully, would offend the people still addicted to illusion. So if you've ever felt like no one gets you, maybe they weren't supposed to. Maybe you weren't meant to be easy to swallow. Maybe your emotions aren't problems. They're proof that you still care, that you still feel, that you're still awake, even if the world around you is sleepwalking. And maybe, just maybe, the reason you've been so exhausted is because you've been shining in places that only wanted shadows. It's strange how everything shifts when you stop pretending. You start hearing your own thoughts again. You notice who disappears when you set boundaries. You see how much of your life was built around being liked, not being free. And Nietzsche would say, this is the beginning of freedom, not in rebellion, but in revelation. You stop asking, what do they want from me? And start asking, what do I actually want? Not out of ego, but out of self-honesty. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to be impressive. You don't need to be liked by everyone you meet. You just need to stop betraying yourself to be accepted. Because the person who finally chooses themselves doesn't need to be saved. It's easy to think you've lost yourself. But more often than not, you've just been hiding. Because life taught you it wasn't safe to be real. That people only stay if you're easy. That love is something you earn by suffering quietly. But Nietzsche believed that the self doesn't need to be created. It needs to be uncovered. And the first sign that you're returning to yourself, you stop apologizing for your depth. You stop laughing at things that don't feel funny. You stop waiting for someone to give you permission to feel whole. You stop acting okay and start being honest. If this spoke to you, it wasn't random. Maybe no one ever told you this. You're not too far gone. You're not too much. You're not behind. You're not broken. You're tired. You're honest. You're feeling things others are too numb to admit. And that makes you powerful. Nietzsche didn't want you to be fearless. He wanted you to be real. Because only when you stop performing can you begin to rebuild a life that fits your soul. So if you've made it here, reading this, feeling this, breathing this in, you've already started. And the next time you find yourself acting okay when you're not, remember, you don't have to. Not anymore.